unit that does do reunions, but they're from another section that was up north in I Corps, and for some reason none of the guys down in 3 Corps seem to belong to it. But my very best friend in Vietnam grew up in Chicago but lives in Wisconsin now. And it took 25 years to find him. We looked for each other for 25 years, but I finally did find him and went out last May to see him. And there are brothers that you have because it is a circumstance of your parents having 2 sons. But there are brothers that you have by choice because you feel a kinship with them. That's the same with any World War II or Korean or Vietnam veteran. And brothers of choice are people that you feel as close to as family, that you knew that you could depend on and trust your life with. And that's a pretty important trust. I would have been sad if I hadn't had an opportunity to go and spend some time with him last May. He wasn't wounded, but he came home and started to have some real serious problems and has for most of his life. He's never been married or had a family, and he is one of the tragedies from Vietnam.
Do you think that your visiting him helped him?
I think it helped us both.
Yeah.
In the community that he's in, he is held in pretty high esteem. Folks know that he's a combat vet. Wisconsin is a fairly conservative part of the country, and he's treated with a great deal of respect. And I was really, really pleased to see that. The other part of it is, frankly, he's an incredible human being. And it took a while through all the medication, but eventually I could see the Doug that I knew in Vietnam. And we did very well when we were out in the field. We were very responsible. We did what we had to do. We both were decorated. But we were 18-year-old kids. And at one time they actually tried to keep us apart because when we got in the rear, we generally got in trouble. We'd borrow a Jeep from an officer and take it on a joyride, or break in a quartermaster to get some supplies, or at the mess hall to get something to eat late at night. And in fact, he came home at PFC and he said, "You know, I don't get it, Ducey. You and I, every time I did something wrong and got in trouble, you were standing right next to me. But you got rank and I didn't." And I said, "Well, it wasn't what we did. It was once we got in trouble, the difference in our attitudes. I'd realize I was in trouble, find a clean uniform and go in and salute smartly to the company commander and stand at parade rest and try and talk my way out of it. You'd go in chewing gum with your hands in your pocket and just make him furious." And he laughed and said, "Well, you know, I was a real citizen soldier. I had no intention of doing 20. And I said, "Well, there again is the difference." At that point, I thought that I would. But this was a guy who, during a firefight, would yell, "You being casual?" He had a bizarre, twisted sense of humor. And it's a really amazing thing to meet another human being that you know you would lay your life down for. To have that kind of friendship is something that, unless you were there, it's hard to even describe or express.
Was Doug with you when you were wounded?
No, he wasn't, because they had split us up. And he actually, I came to in the evac hospital, and he was standing next to my bed. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Hey, man, I had to come in and see you before they, shipped you out of here." And I said, "I don't even want to know. I'm willing to bet you don't have permission to be here." And he just laughed. I don't know if you got in trouble for it or not, but
That meant a lot.
that was less important. Getting in trouble was less important to him than saying goodbye to his friend. At that point, they didn't know if I was going to make it, and I understood years later from him that he was the one that the company commander knew how tight we were, and gave him the bolt cutters to cut open my footlocker. They sent, for the dead and wounded, they sent your personal effects home, and he did the inventory and took care of all of that for me. which was pretty unusual because usually it was the company commander and the company clerk that did it. But
They allowed him to do that.
they allowed him
for
to do
you.
that. And he said that when all the guys came in from the field, they did a "Here's hoping he made it" party and drank a toast to me. And I said I was sure it was helpful in having pulled me through.
Yeah.
Um, and it was amazing because there were four of us that ran together. White kid from Tennessee who was killed. White kid from New England who was wounded. Goldstein, who was just a wise guy, Jewish guy from Chicago, and a black kid from Cleveland, Ohio, named Solly Bell. Bell received the Silver Star. I tracked him down, and Solly E. Bell is a pretty unusual name. When I called the house, I spoke to a gentleman and asked him if he was Solly Bell, and he said yes, and I asked if he was in his 40s, and he said yes, and I asked him had he served in Vietnam in the Army, and he said he couldn't remember. And I thought something seriously wrong here, because folks would generally remember if they served in the Army in Vietnam. And I guess it was his wife took the phone and said, "Who is this?" And I introduced myself and said I had served with Solly Bell in Vietnam and I was looking for him. And she got very angry and said, "He's just come back from the hospital again. You leave him alone. Don't you call here again. He's got enough problems. He doesn't need to talk about that. You leave him alone." And I felt really terrible. We knew that Bell had a real hard time dealing with some things that had happened in Vietnam. He actually, and it was fairly unusual, got into hand-to-hand combat with a knife with a North Vietnamese soldier. When it got up that close and personal, a lot of guys had a hard time dealing with it. And Bell was actually having active hallucinations before he left country. And I remember calling in and saying to the company commander, "You've got to get him out of the field." I mean, he yells in the middle of the night, "Stop him, you can't." He was presenting a danger both to himself and the rest of us. And the company commander's attitude was, "Well, he's going home. Let's not run him through that system. Let's just let him go home. He'll be okay." The military treated you, if you had a nervous breakdown in combat, as though you were a criminal, in order to provoke you to go back to your unit as quickly as possible. And they believed at that time to reduce the number of cases. Since the Civil War, the number of mental health casualties, if you will, has run about 30% of combat veterans. In the Civil War, they called it faint heart or soldier's heart. In World War I, it was shell shock. In World War II and Korea, it was called battle fatigue. And in Vietnam, it was called post-traumatic stress disorder. But it is not anything that is specific to my generation of veterans, although a lot of civilians believe that. And part of the reason is because after World War II, those fellas came home and got put in VA mental hospitals because they didn't know how to treat them and spent their lives there. I've been in VA hospitals in Bedford, Mass. and Northampton that are psychiatric facilities. But those guys spent most of the rest of their lives in those hospitals on Thorazine, so that after a few years of treatment, there wasn't going to be any rehabilitation. Well, that kept them off the streets, and that helped keep the image of they all came home okay a lot more alive. When we started to organize, we were mad as hell, and the individuals who had problems put them right out there in the street for everybody to see. And that was part of the bad rap that we got. The number of casualties, if you will, from battle fatigue were no higher than any other war. But every time somebody did something bad, he was described as a Vietnam veteran. I remember one time I had a job working real estate, and some Vietnam vet had gone crazy and killed somebody. And the people I worked with came in and put a newspaper on my desk with the headline. And I could see him at the other end of the office, kind of peeking around the corner, watching my reaction. And I walked down the hall and said to him, "Do you think I'm going to jump up on my desk and tear my suit off and expose camouflage fatigues and go nuts?" "Well, no, but, you know, we know that a lot of you guys have problems." And I said, "Yeah, that's true.